Like, there was a point when I realized how dependent I really was on other people to feel better. It was not a good look. Today I want So today I wanted to talk about the experience of being in college and going through what I guess I have to call a spiritual awakening. That's a very loaded phrase, and I just want to make it very clear very early on that it's not necessarily this, like, you just open your eyes one day. Well, it might actually be sometimes, but it's not, like, okay. For me, a spiritual awakening it's an ongoing long process that unfolds throughout your entire life. I personally believe that everybody is on a spiritual path, and a spiritual awakening is becoming aware of that path that you have been on and seeing, maybe from like a bird's eye view, where you've been, where you are, and where you are going, even though it's all a blurry mosaic. If you are a tarot reader, it's the progression from the Hanged Man to Death to Temperance. What's 15? Let me look. Oh, the Devil. And then 16 is. Sorry. You know what? I actually take that all back. It's the entire major arcana. This is the book that I got with my very first tarot deck. It has, like, like little tiny, tiny, tiny interpretations of each card. But what I love about it is that there's so much added space for you to write your own notes. Of course, like the Ten of Swords comes in, but you know what? Actually, the Ten of Swords
Please kill me.
is kind of like its own tower moment. It's like its own tower death moment where you've hit your lowest point so far, at least. For me, when it comes to spiritual awakening, the Ten of Swords is when you are forced to look at where your actions, patterns, habits, whatever, it's looking at the damage that they have caused in your life, in the life of other people, perhaps, and owning up to that. And this isn't me saying that, like, we cause all of our problems, because there are external forces that make things worse. But yeah, the Ten of Swords can be part of it too. But anyway, I was going to say that the part of the major arcana that reminds me the most of the spiritual awakening process, at first I thought that it kind of began with death, but now that I think about it, that death experience followed by temperance, the tower, and the star, and the moon, and the sun, that is what I think some people would consider the dark night of the soul, which doesn't have to be the entire thing, especially when you look at it and the spiritual awakening itself is actually, it begins before you're even aware of it. At least, I'm sure it did for me. And in that case, then it begins with the Fool and the Fool's journey, because it goes from, as Kim Kranz describes, spontaneity and innocence to self-empowerment and action. So if we're going to take the word the fool literally, you're actually acting a fool, and then you're like, I created this. And then you become self-empowered and you start to take action on stuff, and then you start to go within with the High Priestess. The part that I'll be describing mostly begins with justice, and justice is that sort of post Ten of Swords experience where in this it's decisions and karma, and it says a weight or heaviness surrounding a choice you have to make. Now is not the time to shun the concept of divine balance or karma. All of your choices affect your life, and sometimes the lives of those around you, both now and in the future. And after justice comes the hermit. And this is the real part that I think is the most relevant to what I'm going to talk about. Sorry, this has already gone so long. I hope that, oof. Anyway, so like whatever. I'm probably going to cut this entire part, but I might not. I don't know. So you go into the hermit, and then you come into the wheel of fortune, destiny, and change of course, and that's also something that I experienced when I was in college and going through all of this. Then you get strength, mastery of emotions, which is actually right here as well in the thing that I pulled earlier today. And then you know, sacrifice, letting go. Wow, like sometimes you really do just go in the order of the major arcana. Speaking of the tarot, I think that if you feel drawn to using the cards, they can be a very useful addition to your experience, especially because of the major arcana being so closely entwined with the process of unfolding and becoming, especially on a spiritual level. I've always associated the major arcana with the spirit aspect of the 5 elements on a pentacle. So when I do, well, sometimes it's a weekly reading, it hasn't been a weekly reading, where I draw one card for all things associated with earth. Sometimes it's more specific. Earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. I draw a card for each one. And then for spirit, I pull from the major arcana. Especially because their effects can be much more like long lasting, where the minor arcana are more like quick. Or they're more obvious. Sometimes the major arcana is pretty obvious, but I think that college can be the best and weirdest time to experience this spiritual awakening of sorts for a few reasons. One of, like, okay, so I think it was like alright. I am so grateful that I experienced this while I was in college because it prevented me from going down a path that was just not. I really don't know where I would be today if I had not been forced to change course, because at this point I probably would still be pushing and trying so hard to achieve something that I don't know, like all of my attempts to do well in this potential career teaching, all of my attempts just made me feel so terrible, except for the times when I was actually working with the students, but that's, I knew that there was no way that I was going to enjoy living if I had to do the Ed TPA that goes along with student teaching, and if I couldn't do the Ed TPA, I don't know how I would be able to do anything. I don't know how I'd be able to do anything, because it would be really nice. It would be really nice if teaching could just be, like working with students, enriching their minds and life, like, but nope, it's just not that way right now, at least in most places. So I'm still getting the Ed major, but I'm not getting certification. But anyway, if I had continued to go down that path, I would have been in an environment that just would grate against my entire being all of the time. Either it would just, I'd probably cry every single day. And I'm not saying that it's a bad career to have or a path to go down if this is still what is right for you, because some of us can handle the environment and we need good people in that environment. We need good people to change that environment so that it's better. But I had to accept that it wasn't the right one for me. And that was very, very difficult for me to do. And it was a very long process of coming to terms with it. A couple years, actually. Anyway, yeah, like if I hadn't experienced this, I don't want to keep calling it an awakening throughout the entire thing because that sounds very pretentious. But I mean, you know, when I started to become more aware of who I really was, because I was trying to fit myself into a role that was not designed for me, and it was just chipping away at my self-esteem constantly. Like, students loved me, like I said, but I always felt just like so bad compared to other ed students because I felt like I just needed like that one little thing to be more like them. I felt like there was some defect in myself that was preventing me from being who I needed to be, when actually, if the system was different, I could just be who I am. I mean, not that I wouldn't have to become better at certain things by any means, but it just, the way the system is now is not a good fit for me. Whatever, this isn't about ed, but if this, like, if any of you can relate to this. So I started out college being really hopeful. I was so excited to go to a school where I felt like I felt like I fit into the school that I applied to and that I went to, and I kind of did. I did. But as the years went on, I began to very much hermit out. I wanted to like just have like a wholesome group of friends who would just kind of like have fun dinner parties, just throwing whatever we could together, or like playing board games and watching movies together. But it just never like really happened in the way that I wanted it to. I did have friends, and I do still have friends, which I'm very grateful for. Whereas in high school, I felt more accepted by certain groups of people. I fit in with the band kids. I fit in with the theater kids, particularly the ones who worked backstage. And like high school was fine. High school was good. Like we were the weird kids at this pretentious high school, but like we fit in with each other, and it was great. But when I went to college, it was very, throughout this whole experience and even today, it has just brought me back to where I was in like preschool to 8th grade, honestly. Maybe not even 8th grade, maybe not even 6th grade, because I like I was able to like fit in with the emo kids, but like preschool to 5th grade, let's say, that was probably the worst time. And I didn't even realize how bad it was when I was the youngest, probably because I was so much more oblivious and my head was like all the way in the clouds. My head was above the clouds. And I don't know, I felt like I've always been like well, I had always been a friendly person. I kind of approached life thinking that I was friends with everyone and that I could be friends with everyone, and I just kind of like, thought that everybody just was nice, but that did not happen that way. I wasn't bullied, I don't think, during school. I was just kind of like on the periphery a lot of the time when I look back, particularly when I was in 3rd to 5th grade, because before then, like things were more structured, and I don't know, it just wasn't as like weird. I don't know, maybe like I don't know, my memory is just really weird. I don't know how my memory works, but I was really lucky with the dorm mates and roommates that I had in my freshman year. A lot of us remained friends in the next year, and many of us were still on friendly terms after that, which was really nice. And if I had been in a different dorm setting. I don't know if that would have been the same. And when I describe this, I don't want to undervalue the fantastic one-on-one friendships and relationships that I've had. I've just always wanted to be able to be part of a friend group. And like, I want to cry right now because I'm just thinking about it. And this brings me to an interesting point, I guess. I don't know, that sounds very like, I don't know, am I a professor? I want to be. Yeah, I still want to teach. It's just not in the cards for me yet. So before I started this video, I had pulled some cards from the Living Wheel astrology deck, and one of the cards was the South Node. And the South Node is about the themes and patterns and just whatever that have been well developed in like previous lifetimes, because the North and South Node are the mathematical points in the chart. In Vedic astrology, they're known as Rahu and Ketu. I don't want to like disrespect them by pronouncing them poorly. Rahu and Ketu. So since I pulled the card for the South Node, I decided to look at where the South Node was in my chart. Actually, no, I already knew where the South Node was. I just wanted to get a little refresher on what it meant to have the South Node in the 11th house. And if you know astrology, then you know exactly where I'm going and why I thought about this just now. But the 11th house is all about groups and friend groups and society and community and everything. And throughout my life, I've always wanted to have that connection with people, with the larger world, which I've managed to fulfill in its own way, like throughout my entire life on the internet. I spend my whole life on the internet because it's so much easier to connect with people there sometimes. So like thinking about all of this, it makes complete sense that this would be a pretty long struggle that I had, and this also goes into what I wrote down in my notes. One thing about the South Node is that it tends to want to repeat itself throughout our present lifetime, and it's different in everybody's chart, but usually it's something that you strive for, but it's always very difficult to fulfill. I mean, there were people that I was friends with early on in college, and I did feel love. I still have friends where we love each other, but we just don't spend a whole lot of time together because we all, like, I don't know, I just became friends with a bunch of other hermits, which is great, I love it. Yeah, so a lot of wounding from early on in life, of feeling isolated and rejected at school especially, those all came back up throughout college. By sophomore year, I was like crying all of the time. I don't think that there was like really a day that went by where I did not cry. I'm pretty sure that is true. I was on a medication, but it just wasn't the right one for me. I would be really anxious, like going to my classes, especially my ed classes, because I was just, I later learned that it just was not really for me. Was hardly able to stay in the classroom for the entire period because I would just feel so like shaky, like, and I've been told that like I have a very strong presence, and that experience of isolation and whatever has caused me to not fully be aware of it. So, especially to people who are like highly empathic in the room, I'm sure that my energy was felt by other people, and so I also kind of felt bad about that, especially when I was looking back on it. So I would excuse myself from the classroom quite frequently, actually, to just, go find a secluded area and cry. And God, it was just such a mess. Sophomore year was rough. Sophomore year is probably the worst. And I think that this is actually a pretty common thing for college students. And I think that there's something to it astrologically. I think it's a Saturn transit. Saturn transit age 21. Every 7 years, Saturn forms an aspect, a major aspect to its original position in your chart. So before you even get to your Saturn return, you have a Saturn square, a Saturn trine, etc. So when you're around 21 years old, you experience Saturn square Saturn, and then you experience it again at age 51. So it's not the perfect 7-year cycle, but then again, Saturn does retrograde and everything. And that's why the Saturn return lasts kind of from 27 to 29 because of those retrogrades. So I'm looking at astroarena12.blogspot.com, and it's Saturn square Saturn transit, age 21 and 51. Are you ready? I love this. So they say these transits are heavy in a manner that can rival your actual Saturn return. This is the quarter life crisis to an extent. I think there is another one by the time you're like 25, but I think that's a different thing. So the square also happens when you're 7 and 35, but they're not nearly as powerful. They're just kind of like moving from early childhood to becoming more consciously aware of the fact that you and other people exist, essentially. That's, I guess, when the Catholic Church determines that people are able to get communion because they are fully conscious or something. This was a period, especially around age 21, when I was really confronting again the real impacts of, well, actually, I was experiencing the impacts of feeling ostracized. And then now, looking back, I'm seeing it from a different perspective because it doesn't affect me as much. So yeah, actually the pre-Saturn return, the Saturn square Saturn transit when you're 21 to 22 is your first wake-up call to why you're here and what you're supposed to achieve. So, like I said, that's why I don't think that I or anyone else is like special for experiencing a spiritual awakening when they're in college or at any point in their life, because I think if you're more spiritually inclined, like I was, and like other people might be, not that this doesn't happen for people who aren't spiritually inclined, because it does. That's why it was around this time when I was like, well, if I can't do this thing that I thought that I was going to do for my entire life until now, what am I supposed to do with myself? Like, what am I gonna? I didn't really have any other plans. And sorry, like, I don't know how often I'm messing with my hair. I need to really stop looking over at it. You're just gonna have to deal with it or look away. So it was the Saturn square Saturn transit, plus other things. And also, I reached my heaviest weight by the time I was in sophomore year, and I was not happy with how I looked, and I just wasn't happy with myself in general. That was fun. I mean, I was still like drinking every weekend, and I was eating like my snacks were like flamin' hot munchies and those like little airdrops. No, those little airhead drops things. So, what would you expect? So, yeah, I was like horribly depressed all of sophomore year. Saturn. And things got dark. And things have always been a little dark for quite some time, but it was bad again. And I experienced at this time a mild, or like, no, I wrote mild to severe in this, but I experienced a moderate existential crisis where I would have these solipsistic anxiety attacks where I'd be like, am I hallucinating everything around me? Am I just, am I unconscious somewhere? Am I institutionalized somewhere and I'm just like creating all of this? And then when you go through like a spiritual awakening, like you become okay with the fact that that might be true or that something similar to that is true. It's really fun. So yeah, like it wasn't a thing that I was thinking about like every day, but it was pretty frequent, especially if I was already experiencing like a breakdown in the middle of the night. I also had some other like weird anxieties about myself, and that just there's a lot there too. We're not gonna get into those ones. It was around this time when I remember looking at all my like school stuff and my notes and my homework and everything, and I was like, if I can't organize this, how am I supposed to be as organized as I need to be a teacher? I didn't have like a specific like teacher binder at this point with all the things that I needed like to have together in one spot. Like it just was not, I just didn't have the systems in place. I kind of do now, but it's not the best. It's still better though. This sophomore year was the time when I started to become aware, or I started to feel that this lifelong dream of teaching like started to fall apart. It was just it was about to cave in. That was not fun at all. I also remember seeing some stuff about like I think it might have been in some of my transits or it was in some tarot readings. I really don't remember, but I was getting these messages like don't assign a career path or whatever to your identity, or like don't make that your identity, or else when you lose it you're going to lose yourself. That was hard to take in, and I got there eventually. It was also at the very end of the school year when I realized, oh, all of these years of perceived failure have been the result of having ADHD. It's not just me. I started taking medication that worked for me later that summer, and it was fantastic. And even just knowing that I had ADHD, like, it just lifted a whole weight off my shoulders or chest or mind or whatever. I also, like, accidentally then lost all of the weight that I had gained and then some. And then I was at my lowest weight ever, and that was also pretty terrible. I hated my body. I didn't hate myself as much though. So that was nice. Not that those two things coincide, I just, I stopped eating shit. But still, I felt really bad about my body image because I had gotten so thin, and then I was able to see like creases in my face. Like if I smiled and then I stopped smiling, there would still be creases there because I didn't have nearly as much fat up here. And then like later on, I got back to like a healthy weight that I like. I like having flesh on my face. So it was around the time after I learned I had ADHD, in the summer of 2016, that I began my first grimoire. It smelled really good for a very long time, and it still does. Good. So, baby witch notes. And then I also started taking notes about tarot in the back of this. So this is really sweet. It's really nice. I just love it. It was in 2016 when I started my little grimoire, and that's where the conscious part of my spiritual awakening was happening. Things were all right for a little while, and then the 2016 election happened, and as a result, I experienced a long period of fear and panic, for like apocalyptic levels of fear, and I know that I'm not the only one. But I also went into it knowing that I was the one who was ultimately in control of what I believed and felt, not that that didn't prevent me from stocking up on extra rice and canned foods and other things, like just in case. That fear has subsided since then, but then it was shortly replaced with another fear that was just as pervasive, that was also much more personal to me and my life and not on so much of a global scale. Yeah, that was a wild time, but I also knew with the emergence of these fears, I knew that there was something to be learned here. I began to figure out the difference between like following my intuition or reacting based on fear. Most of those things were fear, but I also don't regret any of the actions or choices I made when I was going through them, because I think that fear does serve a purpose on its own. And I'm not saying that it's like always good to act based on fear, but sometimes like things just happen as they happen, and then you realize why it was actually useful later on. So throughout all of this, I was exploring the spiritual and new agey side of YouTube, and I already kind of knew a lot of the concepts that I was learning about, but that was a thing. It was interesting seeing all the things that people had to say about stuff. Like I said, I had already been kind of spiritual through my whole life, so I listened to some popular figures in that community for a little while until they just started to have really bad vibe with me. I just did not like them at all. And anyway, so then I found different people to learn from. I was mostly in a state of absorbing all of the information that I was taking in. I didn't really like adopt most of the beliefs as my own. I added certain ones to my framework that actually resonated with me and not the ones that made me feel more fearful. So like all of the stuff that happened because I wanted to heal from like whatever it was that I was healing from. Like everything. I just wanted to heal in general. I wanted to learn how to take care of myself. So like I didn't feel horribly alone during college. I just didn't experience what I thought that I wanted to experience. I also had friends who were into magic and spiritual things, so I didn't feel like I was completely um out there. But as things progressed, I did feel a bit more like disconnected from people ideologically and spiritually. But not everybody. Not everybody. But, like, there was a point when I realized how dependent I really was on other people to feel better. It was not a good look. And I realized that I needed to reconnect with myself in order to feel the security and happiness and love that I wanted to experience. Like, as cheesy as that sounds. So, like, I've been a hermit essentially for quite some time now. It's been fun. I've liked it kind of. I feel like I've missed out on the possibility of a lot of really great friendships due to the self-isolation and also the social anxiety. But more or less, I'm quite happy being on my own and spending most of my time alone. However, like, I do have plenty to say at some point when I feel comfortable about my experience with love and dating. I did start dating somebody around like August of last year, and I also adopted a cat in the same month, and I just, oop, dang it. Whatever, I guess I'll just have to deal with this little thing. So I kind of see that as a sort of like congratulations from the universe for all of the work that I have done on myself and just in like whatever in general. I'm sure that there's more that I could talk about if I like remember some things or if you have any questions about some things. So, if you're experiencing anything close to a spiritual awakening and you're in college or college aged or just like in an environment where you just don't feel like you can fit in, I just want you to know that you are not alone in this experience. It is a bumpy ride, and I am definitely not an expert on any of it. I just know what I've experienced, and I know what might have been nice to hear when I was first going through it. So I hope that this has helped you in some way, or if you think that this could help somebody else, please let them know that this video exists. Send them the link to it. If you got anything out of this video, please leave a like. If you want to hear more of what I have to say in the future, please subscribe, and bye!